gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig...
All right, let's dive into this. The fall of Hitler. We're going way beyond the usual timelines here, right?
Absolutely. This is about getting inside the collapse of Nazi Germany, really understanding the factors at play. It's complex.
You've given me a ton of material for this one too. Books, articles, even some declassified stuff. Like, wow.
You gotta go deep to get it right, you know? It wasn't just a house of cards that suddenly fell apart.
So where do we even begin? When do the first cracks start to show in Hitler's regime?
Let's start with 1943. That's a year when the facade really starts to crumble.
Okay, but the world sees Germany as this unstoppable force at this point, right?
Exactly. On the surface, they're this military powerhouse. But underneath, the seeds of destruction were already sown.
You're saying this goes back even further than 43?
Oh yeah. Think 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Colossal blunder.
What made it such a mistake? It seemed to work for a while, didn't it?
They were riding high on early victories, sure. But overextending like that. Echoes of Napoleon's disaster in Russia. Brutal winter, supply lines a mess, completely misjudged their enemy.
And Hitler just didn't see that coming.
It was a drain they couldn't sustain. Manpower, resources. Stalingrad in 43, that's when it really hit home.
That's the big turning point everyone talks about.
More than a military loss, though. It was psychological. Shattered that aura of invincibility. Over 800,000 German casualties. Think about that. An entire army. Gone.
Just wiped out. So that's got to be when Hitler starts to doubt, to reassess.
You'd think, right. But that's where it gets really interesting. This is where Hitler's decision-making takes a turn. A bad one.
What do you mean?
The guy who was once considered this tactical genius, he starts making reckless decisions, ignoring the reality on the ground.
Like what? Give me an example.
He's getting reports from the front, seeing the casualty numbers, but he doubles down, pushes even harder.
He's ignoring reality.
Even worse, he starts dismissing his generals. Anyone who tries to tell him it's a lost cause.
He's shutting out the people who know best. Why?
Pride, mostly. Unshakable belief in his own gut, even when it's dead wrong. Plus, he's isolated himself, surrounded by yes men.
So he's stuck in this echo chamber of his own making. And the whole time, the Allies are making their move.
June 6, 1944, D-Day.
The Allies land in Normandy, open up a second front. Germany's already bogged down in the east.
Logistical nightmare. Trying to fight a war on two fronts, resources stripped paper thin.
Did that wake Hitler up, seeing that the Allies were serious?
If anything, it's the opposite. The pressure cranks up 100 times over. Picture this: Hitler's in his bunker in Berlin.
The city's being bombed, the Red Army's closing in.
And he's down there, sick, stressed, but still giving orders like he can control reality itself.
He still thinks he can win at that point.
Fixated on these so-called wonder weapons he thinks will turn the tide. Things like the V-2 rockets.
Delusional.
And he's convinced with zero basis that the Allies and the Soviets will turn on each other.
He's gambling everything on a pipe dream, while the people around him are realizing it's over.
That's right. This is where things get really interesting. We're talking 1945 now. The noose is tightening.
This is where it all falls apart.
The Red Army, they're less than 40 miles from Berlin. And you start to see cracks in the Nazi leadership. Not everyone's going down with the ship.
Always someone looking out for number one.
Some are true believers, right to the end. Goebbels, for example, spouting the propaganda even as the bombs fall.
Fanatics.
But then you have others, high-ranking officials, realizing it's over, trying to cut deals, disappear with whatever loot they can grab.
From your inner circle must stun, even for someone like Hitler.
It's fascinating, right? This guy built his power on this idea of absolute loyalty, and now, when he needs it most, gone.
Everyone for themselves.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the Red Army's getting closer every day.
So what happens when they finally reach Berlin? I mean, this is it, right? The end game.
The Battle of Berlin. April, May 45. Brutal. Last stand, but they're outmatched, outgunned. Germany's conscripting children, old men, just to try and hold the line.
Aspiration.
The city's wrecked, street fighting, buildings blasted to rubble.
And Hitler? Where is he during all of this? Still holed up in his bunker.
Oh, he's there. But his whole world is the size of a few rooms underground.
Cut off from reality.
Issuing orders nobody can follow. Moving armies that don't exist anymore.
It's tragic, like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
One of your sources, Ian Kershaw, the historian, he put it perfectly, said, Hitler's empire, all that ambition, shrunk down to a concrete cell, a microcosm of the ruin he unleashed.
Wow. Yeah, that's about right. So, the end. Take us through those final days, those final moments. What happens?
April 30th, 1945. Soviets are just blocks away. Hitler commits suicide, takes Eva Braun with him, married her the day before.
Dramatic end to a dramatic life, I guess you could say.
Pivotal moment, though. Not just the end of the war in Europe, but it forces the world to confront what happened.
Yeah, the reckoning. What do you do after something like that?
Exactly. With Hitler gone, the Nazi leadership. Total disarray. Some try to run, some get caught, some end up taking the same way out as Hitler.
It's a suicide.
But the world, Germany especially, they're left to pick up the pieces.
Which brings us to the aftermath, I guess. That's a whole other conversation.
Crucial part of the story, though, because the fall of Hitler, that wasn't the end of Nazism. Not overnight, anyway.
Right, the ideology, the hate, that doesn't just disappear.
So you have this massive task, rebuilding, not just buildings, but a whole continent, really, physically, psychologically, figuring out how do you hold people accountable for this?
Justice.
The Nuremberg trials start in 45. Unprecedented, really. Individuals being held responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, changes international law forever.
I think what struck me reading about it wasn't just about punishment. It was about truth.
Right. Exposing the Holocaust to the world. 6 million Jews systematically murdered. That evidence, the documents, the testimonies.
Terrific.
And it really made people ask, can you ever really have justice for that kind of loss?
I don't know. It's almost too big to comprehend.
But those trials, they set a precedent. Crimes against humanity, not anymore. Those responsible will be held accountable.
Laid the groundwork for everything that came after. The International Criminal Court, all of it. So the world's trying to process this massive trauma, hold people accountable, rebuild. What about Germany itself? How do you even begin to come to terms with a past like that?
That's where it gets really interesting, you know?
You know, it's just hard to wrap my head around that transition from total war to trying to build a new world out of the wreckage, to process that level of trauma on a societal scale.
And for everyday Germans, it was a complete 180. They went from Nazi ideology being everywhere, schools, news, you name it, to it being completely taboo overnight.
I mean, there had to be people who really bought into it, right? Believed the propaganda, got swept up in the movement. How do you come to terms with that when everything you thought you knew is suddenly wrong?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some embraced denazification, wanted to understand their own role, build a better future. Others, denial, downplaying it, minimizing what happened.
Trying to forget, maybe.
Maybe. But the past has a way of catching up. And all the while, they're dealing with the physical reality, too. Germany was decimated.
Right, the rebuilding. Cities in ruins, industries gone.
The Marshall Plan, that was huge. 1948, the U.S. pumping money in, helping to rebuild not just Germany, but all of Western Europe. Logistically, it was incredible.
So while you're trying to process this traumatic past, you're also just trying to survive in the present.
Yeah.
Did it work, though? I mean, did going through something like that fundamentally change Germany?
It's hard to overstate the impact. Post-war Germany, it's a different country. There's this self-awareness, a sensitivity to human rights. You see it everywhere.
Like a deep sense of shame.
More than that, it's like, they stared into the abyss and it changed them. Pacifism became deeply ingrained, a direct response to the horrors they experienced.
It's a powerful thing to come back from that and choose a completely different path.
It really is. And it shows the resilience of the human spirit, right? To emerge from that darkness and choose democracy, tolerance. It's remarkable.
Makes you think. Maybe there's hope, even after the worst things imaginable.
Hope has to start somewhere. And sometimes it's in the most unexpected places.
You said it. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the fall of Hitler. It's one of those topics that really sticks with you, you know?
It's not just history, is it? It's a reminder.
Absolutely. That the choices we make matter. That individuals have the power to shape the world, for good or for evil. It's a heavy thought, but an important one.
It is, and it's up to all of us to learn from the past and make sure something like that never happens again.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep searching for answers, and keep diving deep.